All right, Zephaniah chapter 2. Last week, who remembers what the theme of last week's lesson was? The emergency alert. That's right, the emergency alert system. The all of a sudden, and I love Zephaniah. He is not a socialite. He is not a politician. He's not a 10-minute speech to figure out what he wants. It's like, hey, this is coming. You need to pay attention. And I love that blunt, grab your attention, because a lot of times we can gauge how important a person's conversation is by the urgency that we can kind of get and glean from their voice and their demeanor. You know, somebody comes running up to you, out of breath, talking to you, you're going to be fully focused on what they're trying to tell you because it's something obviously important, something concerning. And that's Zephaniah. Now, we've already had one who's been able to figure out, what is this?
Banana.
Close. It's not quite a banana. Yes, this is Israel.
Oh.
See, don't you feel so much, you know, yeah.
Can we take up a fund for an art director?
Yes, you can. This is Israel. Last week's focus was you, because when you're sitting in the comfort of your home and you hear that beep come on the radio, you know that they're not giving you the weather report for Chicago. You know they're not telling you about something that happened over some other far place in the country. This is you where you live. Now, chapter 2 gives us more of a national weather map. And that's what we're going to look at today. Spend the few minutes that we have looking at a national weather map. 15 quick verses. I'll guarantee you it's not going to be the longest lesson you've ever had. And there's nobody who has ever said, Dave, you have to keep them for 45 minutes longer than you need to. So we aren't going to do that. When we're done, we're going home, okay? We haven't finished the fudge yet. We just haven't. So it's waiting on us. And now I will tell you, I've got a doctor's appointment, annual physical on the 6th of January. I probably should have mentioned this before we got started. And it's just an annual physical, and it's a new doctor. So the new doctor says, well, I want to visit you and see you first, and then we'll do labs. Then we'll figure out what labs you should do. So I am just running with scissors with fudge and cookies.
You know that's
Is it really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah, well, you get the idea then, right? It's just like, so we're just enjoying the holidays with the family. He's going to take that blood test, and it's going to come out maple syrup. And so afterwards, I'm going to go back to what I know I'm supposed to be doing, and he's going to say, you're doing such a great job. I know it's going to happen. But that's kind of the theory, see? Yeah. My little secret, pro tip for you. Now, he may not enjoy that perspective, and I'm not going to tell him all of that. But anyway, so that's coming up. All right. What's that? What's his name? Whose name? I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. It's some new doctor. Yeah, I don't. You know what? You know how it is. Those of you that have been, on TRICARE and have, the military system for doctors. It doesn't matter if you memorize your doctor's name, because in like 6 months, he or she is going to transfer, and you're going to have a new one anyway. So or they're not there when you have a need, and then it's anybody else who's on the team, some nurse practitioner, and I have to look at the prescription bottle to see the name of the doctor anymore. It's just that way. Anyway, has nothing to do with the lesson. So, last week we talked about the emergency alert system. Today we want to talk about the national forecast. So, the good news is, the good news is, God cares about the locality. God cares about your neighborhood. God cares about your farm, your little piece of property, your homestead. He cares enough to send the messenger that says, hey, Dave, you need to know that you're in the path of this storm. And hopefully that was the lesson that we kind of took for last week is, there's some things that we need to address in our own lives. We need to make sure, because we talked about different groups of people in chapter 1, and I encourage you to go back and read it again. He's talking about specific groups of people that he was trying to give a warning to. But he also cares about the entirety of it. He cares about his entire nation, the entire nation of Israel. And so in today's forecast, let's start in verse 1 of chapter 2. Gather yourselves together, yea, gather together, O nation not desired. Love that phrase. O nation not desired. What do you think he's trying to say? Yes.
My version says without.
Without shame, exactly. They're both saying the same thing. Why would they not be desired? Because they have no shame. Because nothing seems to embarrass them. Because they've allowed this mixing with the world. And that's primarily what's going on in Israel at the time. Because remember, there's still a divided kingdom at this point. And so the northern tribes, the worship of the false gods and the all the things that they have going on up there, and the mixing of the traditions of the world and the things that go on in society with what's supposed to be going on, and even Judah, godly Judah, Jerusalem, we'll see them called out here in a minute too, have allowed this to infiltrate not only their churches but into their daily lives. You have no shame. And I think that I love the King James and the New American Standard and some of these other versions together. Without shame, not desired. Well, why would God desire somebody who shames him? I mean, that kind of stands to reason, right? It kind of makes sense. But he says, gather yourselves together. To gather yourselves together means this is a national call. It's not just David on Joe Frazier Road or off Joe Frazier Road in Buford. It's all y'all, to use the Southern plural. That was Pastor Yee. He could have just said all y'all, because that's who he's talking to. Gather yourselves together, ye. Gather together, O nation not desired. Why? Because verse 2, before the decree bring forth, or before it starts to happen, you have until the first rain drops to get yourselves together and to avoid this judgment for yourselves. Now, he's not going to stave off the judgment that's coming. The rain is going to come. But we individually have an opportunity to shield ourselves from it. We have an opportunity to know that we're not going to have to face this judgment because we've repented. Because it's the same message for us. Hey, lost and dying world in 2025, all of the plans that you have set ahead for this year, all of your goals. One of my goals this year is to go to heaven with the rest of you when the Lord comes back. But short of that happening, there's some things that we need to do. We need to take better care of ourselves. And I kind of half joke about my appointment coming up on the 6th. But I want to see my grandkids do things. I want to see my great-grandkids. That may not be for me, but I'm going to work towards that until the Lord takes me home. And so when you see here, before the decree bring forth, before that first raindrop, before the day pass as the chaff, before the fierce anger of the Lord come upon us, before the day of the Lord's anger come upon you, seek ye the Lord. This last, I'm imploring you. It's going to happen. And remember, again, think of where we are in the concept of time. The last pre-exilic prophet. Captivity's coming in just a few short years. It's coming quicker than you think. As quick as the chaff would blow away from the wheat when on the threshing floor. Yes. The warning, the answer, and the opportunity. Yes, absolutely. This is going to happen, but I love you so much. I mean, how many times as parents, look, I don't want to do this. I've told you, do this. Cut the grass, pick up your bike, make your bed. Fill out the exhaustive list that sometimes we have to say a second or third time. Why is it there's something about elevation that affects tone and pitch in speech. Because I can sit on the couch and say, do this. They ignore you. It's not until you stand up that all of a sudden they heard you. It's amazing. It's kind of where God is here. I mean, this isn't the first warning that we've read about. Even in Zephaniah, saying, hey, this is coming. This is happening. You need to address this. But here we are in verse 3. Seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Wait a second. Meek of the earth. Is that what he called them? Is that what he had to say to characterize them in verse 1? O nation not desired? Oh, shameful nation, because they're so blatant and so open in their rebellion, in their disobedience. To turn around in verse 3, all ye meek of the earth. Well, is he talking about the same people? Maybe the 5 or 10%. You know what I think? I think it's the 5 or 10%, but I think it's those who are the shameful. All of those who are the not desired, who hear the warning and say, God, you're right. You are talking to me. Do you know who it is? It's the two this morning who decided this morning, I need to humble my heart. And I need to come to you. And I need to beg for your mercy. And I need to ask for your forgiveness. Because that's not the same person of verse 1, but it's the same person of verse 1. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It's the same shell. It's a different inside. That marks the believer. They're not shameful. They're not desired material anymore. So verse 3 again, seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. You guys brought this judgment. It was you, your proud heart, your unashamed rebellion and sin. You're the ones who wrought this judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be ye be, let me try that again. It may be ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. And we know about the Lord imploring in Isaiah 55, in 55 verse 6, we're not going to turn there, where he says, seek ye the Lord while he may be found. That's really what Zephaniah is saying. While he may be found, why he's still available to stop this for you. That's the message of Zephaniah. Because after those first raindrops come, you bought it. You've made your decision. That ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. Now, let's look at this forecast. This is the nation of Israel. We aren't doing green screens. We aren't doing motion-activated maps. But I think we'll get the idea. The first look that he wants to make is towards the west, towards this area out here. Up along the coastline. Who lived along the coastlines in Israel at that time? Philistines did, that's right. And a lot of those Philistine cities, Gaza's down here, all in this area. Now, verse 4, for Gaza shall be forsaken, and Ashkelon a desolation. They shall drive out Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron shall be rooted up. Now, those names right there should be familiar names because you see them quite often in the Old Testament. Those are the capital cities. Those are some of the major cities that these folks had. Now, when we talk about Gaza, we talk about the Philistines. Let's read a couple more verses. Let's read verses 4 through 6 altogether, or verse 7 rather. So, for Gaza shall be forsaken, and Ashkelon a desolation. They shall drive out Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron shall be rooted up. Woe unto the inhabitants of the seacoast, the nation of the Cherethites. The word of the Lord is against you, O Canaan, the land of the Philistines. I will even destroy thee, that there shall be no inhabitant. What's supposed to happen to all those people who live in Gaza that aren't Israelites? Gone. But where did the Philistines come from? That was their land, right? No. Which island? Crete, because it has to do with the Cherethites. They come from the island of Crete. How did they get there? Who remembers? I know we talked about it once, but who remembers? I don't expect you to remember what we've talked about, but who remembers from their own studies? How did they get there? Couldn't swim. That's part of it. You're exactly right. That's exactly right. They couldn't swim. Hey, I'm giving him great deference. He recognized Israel. So, okay, Ramesses III, Pharaoh, Egypt. In his mausoleum, wherever they bury these guys, there are some inscriptions that talks about these Catholites, or we're gonna see the term here in a minute, captors. And it deals with Crete, and it deals with these northern islands. Now, we all know from our history what type of a military power Egypt was. You weren't just going to go up and throw rocks at them and win. It's just the way it was. But these islands, including Crete, had come together, and they were going to take on Egypt. And so they set to sail, and it didn't work out very well for them. And as a result, the ones that couldn't swim were cast off this way. There were also bands that decided they were going to try to come down the coast and then come over here. Okay. Egypt's over here. That's our little Sinai. Just trust me, it is. It's there. And so they would come. What's that? That's right. So you have some of them coming down the coast trying to attack Egypt. You've got the ships down there trying to attack Egypt. And of course, it didn't work out very well. And so there's this huge, embarrassing defeat. So these guys just kind of camped out here. Some of them were relocated here. And so the Philistines and all of these cities that we're talking about, Ekron and Ashkelon and all those kinds of places, that's how they got there. So we can say that these residents of Gaza and all of these other cities weren't supposed to be there. They're not from there. That's not their land. They settled there after these huge defeats at the hands of the Egyptians. Remember that for current conversation when those things come up. God didn't give them that land. For Gaza, verse 4, shall be forsaken, and Ashkelon, a desolation. They shall drive out Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron shall be rooted up. Woe unto the inhabitants of the seacoast. All of those folks in there. The nation of the Cherethites. The word of the Lord is against you, O Canaan, the land of the Philistines. I will even destroy thee, that there shall be no inhabitants. And the seacoast shall be dwellings and cottages for shepherds and folds for flocks. All these great cities that you've built up. The shepherds are going to, the sheep are going to graze in your streets. We're talking about desolation. We're talking about just a complete wiping out of all their commerce, all of their people. I don't want you there. You don't belong there, is what God is telling them. Verse 7. And the coast shall be for the remnant of the house of Judah. I love the fact that he uses that term. I'm going to get you, Judah. The storm's coming. It's here to judge you. But then he talks about the remnant. That promise that there will be a remnant. That there will be those that will be protected and preserved. Those that trust in him. That no matter how bad the judgment comes, no matter how horrible this storm is, no matter how bad this emergency alert is for the entire nation, there will be a remnant. There will be a believing group who's left, who will be there to possess. And so in the coast, verse 7 again, shall be for the remnant of the house of Judah. They shall feed thereupon in the houses, and Ashkelon shall they lie down in the evening, for the Lord their God shall visit them and turn away their captivity. This pre-exilic prophet, this last of the pre-exilic prophet, is trying to get his mind around that they're going into captivity. And so it's interesting in verse 7 to hear those words, God shall visit them and turn away their captivity. Even this captivity they're going into isn't going to last. It's for a season, it's for a time. This captivity of this coastline that the Philistines had been able to enjoy all these years. Don't worry, I'm going to turn away that captivity. I'm going to return it to the remnant of Judah, which is where they're supposed to be today. So again, when you see Gaza and you see all these areas in here where you hear about, well, Israel is the rightful owner of that land. They're the ones who are supposed to be there. So that's a look to the west. So looking at the west, yeah, there's going to be some storms here. There's going to be some crisis times. There's going to be some emergency alerts for all these little cities that we talked about. So on the national picture, God's not just working with the individual Israelites who live in these areas. That's what that emergency alert system was. But nationally, it's your neighbors over here. These guys who aren't supposed to be here, I got something for them too. Now, starting in verse 8, we're going to shift our eyes from the west. We're going to go over here to the east. Let's see what he says about them. Verse 8. I have heard the reproach of Moab and the revelings of the children of Ammon, whereby they have reproached my people and magnified themselves against their border. Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, surely Moab shall be as Sodom, and the children of Ammon as Gomorrah, even the breeding of nettles and salt pits and perpetual desolation. The residue of my people shall spoil them, and the remnant of my people, there's that reminder again, that promise, the remnant of my people. And I think it's particularly interesting that it's the remnant of the people that are going to enjoy this. Because Ammon and Moab were generally, Moab, the Ammonites were kind of up in this area up here. And where do these tribes come from? Who remembers? Who was Ammon and Moab? Where did they come from? Think. Pop quiz. Right? Think of Noah. Yeah, so down the line. Noah, his daughters. No? Lot, thank you. Lot. Lot and his daughters, what happened? What happened? What's Lot's story? He talked about Sodom and Gomorrah. Where'd Lot go? He got to the cave and got drunk, and then what happened? And then the daughters came in, and then how we... These are the children that came out of that. And what's God's opinion? What is God's opinion concerning the children of Israel and their affiliations with Ammon and Moab? Who remembers? Exactly. Deuteronomy 23. Let's go there for a second. I heard it. Deuteronomy 23. And verse 3. Deuteronomy 23 and verse 3. And we'll just read verses 3 and 4. Deuteronomy 23:3 says, an Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord, even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation of the Lord forever. Now, it wasn't necessarily just because of the circumstances of their being born. And I want us to understand that. God doesn't necessarily judge you because of your circumstances. And I think that's an important lesson for us to really take on board. Think of your childhood. Think of maybe some circumstances that maybe you were born into or that you had to endure growing up that weren't pleasant. We're not going to take the time to ask for testimonies here, but I think that we all understand sometimes that I'm glad God doesn't judge me because of because of the circumstances I was brought into. But rather, God's going to hold me accountable for my actions. And that's what we see in verse 4 of Deuteronomy 23. Why? Because they met you not with bread and with water in the way when you came forth out of Egypt, and because they hired against thee Balaam, the son of Beor, of Pethor, of Mesopotamia, to curse thee. Do you remember when they were fleeing Egypt and they needed help? They just wanted to pass through. And they said, no, if they come in, we're going to destroy all of you. Because of their decisions, because of their decided, I hate you. I hate your God, so therefore I hate you. Because of that, God says, you guys, you'd have nothing to do with them. And the whole time during this divided kingdom, these guys were constantly adversarial to the tribes that lived up here, constantly adversarial. These are the ones that rejoice when something bad happens to Israel. When a foreign king comes in, or some national tragedy, or some sort of crisis or calamity, these are the guys that celebrated. And so back in Zephaniah chapter 2, verse 10, Well, let's go back to verse 8. I have heard the reproach of Moab and the revilings of the children of Ammon, whereby they have reproached my people and magnified themselves against their border. Constantly antagonistic. Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord of hosts, and does he live? Yes, he does. That tells me that it's absolute certain. As I live, saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, surely Moab shall be as Sodom, and the children of Ammon as Gomorrah. I think it's interesting. There's a lot of history that's happened since the time of Sodom and Gomorrah. I think there's some poetic license being taken here against Lot, their patriarch, and what went on there, to go back and say, the same destruction that drove them out, that set up this scenario for this to happen and you to even be in existence. I just think it's kind of interesting that he could have used a lot of things. And even the breeding of nettles and salt pits of a perpetual desolation, the residue of my people shall spoil them, and the remnant of my people shall possess them. Boy, it sure is a message of hope to the children of Israel, isn't it? Do you think they'll keep that message of hope very close to their hearts when they're being carried away into captivity? Do you think it might be a challenge to recall that message of hope and have this spark of, man, I can't wait, while they're being slaves and servants in the captivity? Do you think it'll be easy for them to maintain that message of hope when they start coming back under Nehemiah and under Ezra? When they start looking at the relaying of the temple foundation and they see that it's just not as big as it was. Because you remember that when we talked about that, there were two groups of people that were wailing when they dedicated that foundation, when they first laid the foundation. There were two groups, remember? There was the group that said, yes, we finally have a temple to worship in. And there was a group that said, it's not nearly as big as it was. What side were they on? They're thinking, but wait, look at the bigger picture. God has promised us. I remember Zephaniah told us that God promised us we're going to have victory over our enemies. Why are we fussing over the size of the foundation that is going to burn away someday anyway? When God's got bigger plans for us. God has promised me a part of the remnant. God has promised me victory over these mortal enemies. We're going to occupy those spaces. They're going to know our God is the God of heaven. If I'm only faithful. It's a challenge for you and I today to remember the big picture promises. We think about the Lord's coming back in glory and we're going to heaven. We get this understanding of what the millennial is going to be like. What it's going to be like to be in glory with our loved ones and see our friends again. And we look forward to that day. And we even talk about, this year, Lord, maybe 2025 is the last calendar year. Well, it'll be the last check I mess up. But then in the crisis of the moment, when the water heater goes out, or the roof needs to be replaced, or somebody gets sick, it's hard to maintain that perspective sometimes. And I think he knows that. And I think he understands that. And that's why he wants us to have these promises on paper to remind ourselves, yes, but better's coming. Yes, but we'll get through this. Yes, but all this stuff's going to burn away. And that's a great comfort, but I need it for tomorrow, unless it's tomorrow. And so we stress about these things. And I think the important thing is for us to remember the big picture promises, even in the darkest moment. Dark clouds, horrible forecast for the Philistines to the west and to the Ammonites and the Moabites. And we've got all this stuff going on. There. Might need to hire a speller too. All these things going on, but we've got these big picture promises. But in this national forecast, you guys aren't exempt from that local emergency alert. You guys on the west, you're not exempt from that local forecast. And then starting down in verse 12, we're going to look at the south. Ye Ethiopians also, ye shall be slain by my sword. Ethiopia. All right. Well, you know what I meant. To the south, ETH. So down there to the south, because of your participation, because of your hate for my people, you're going to be judged too. And we see different places in Scripture where Ethiopia is talked about, because we talk about the Cushites, we talk about Cathor, and I'll just have you write down, if you will, Ezekiel 38:5. You can go look at that a little bit later on your own. They were always been affiliated with Egypt. You can write down 2 Chronicles 12:3, Nahum 3:9. Anytime you see Egypt, a lot of the times that you see Egypt and how they're coming up against the Israelites and how they're causing all this trouble, quite often the Ethiopians are aligned with them. Why? Because like many nations of the world, the Ethiopians were subject to the Egyptians. The Egyptians were in control of the known world at that time. And so all of these other nations were affiliated with them. Ethiopia had great armies. They didn't have great armies in the Egyptian army. So when they went out on these campaigns, the Ethiopians went with them. So what's God saying? Be careful who you align yourselves with. Be careful who you align yourselves with. Just because somebody's under the banner, they're the main force that's involved with a particular thing, doesn't mean you escape judgment because you're not one of them. What are you doing? There's a lot going on in our world today that, well, I'm not writing these laws. I'm not writing these policies. But if I'm supporting these laws and supporting these policies, God's not going to hold me guiltless if there are things that are directly opposed to what he has said in Scripture. So we've got the forecast looking at the west, we've got the forecast looking at the east, and now the south, and then finally in the last couple of verses, we're going to look at the north. Verse 13, and he will stretch out his hand against the north and destroy Assyria, and will make Nineveh a desolation and dry like a wilderness. Now, right about now, if I'm hearing these words and I'm a Ninevite, I'm thinking, you're not the first one who's told me that. Maybe I really do need to listen. You know how sometimes you're listening intently to see if your name's called on something, and you think you might have heard it? Well, but you got lost in everything else. Then somebody else says your name, you need to pay attention. It sure speaks to the certainty that something's going to happen. And look at what he says about it. As a dry wilderness, verse 14, and flocks shall lie down in the midst of her. All her beasts of the nations, both the cormorant and the bittern, shall lodge in the upper lintels of it. Their voice shall sing in the windows. Desolation shall be in the thresholds, for he shall uncover the cedar work. What's that a picture of? You know what I picture? You ever watch an old Western where they go into the ghost town and the windows are broken out and the little tumbleweeds are up there on the wooden wheel where you tie up the horses and all that stuff, and just the things are just falling apart, and the birds are living in the rooms? That's really what he's talking about here. He's talking about a desolation and a destruction where the birds just have free run of everything because there's nobody there to shoo them out. There's nobody there for the upkeep and the maintenance and to keep things running. The flock shall lie down in the midst of her, all the beasts of the nations, both the cormorant and the lintels of it. Their voice shall sing in the windows. Desolation shall be in the thresholds, for he shall uncover their cedar work. This is the rejoicing city that dwelt carelessly, Nineveh, that said in her heart, I am, and there is none beside me. Remember, we talked about what a mighty, powerful military center of the Assyrian army and the Assyrian nation, and how they were just undefeatable. It'd be like our Washington, D.C. or New York or some powerful city. Not saying they don't deserve it now. Let's not get ahead of myself. I am, and there is none beside me. How is she become a desolation, a place for beasts to lie down in? Everyone that passeth by her shall hiss and wag his hand, and just kind of shake their heads and just, how could this be? How could this be? So the west, you got the Philistines. To the east, you got Moab and Ammon. You got Ethiopia to the south, Assyria to the north. I think this is my finite mind thinking. I think what he's saying is those of you guys that sit on the fringes, okay? The Bible is God's story. It's God's book for his people. Nobody would disagree with that, right? I think what he's saying is this is his book for those who aren't his people, right? You heard the warning. You heard the emergency alert system for these guys. And I have to believe that they're kind of looking saying, ooh, he's mad at them. But that has nothing to do with me. I don't live in Israel. I'm not an Israelite. God's not talking to me. I think in Zephaniah chapter 2, God is saying, yes, I am talking to you. I am talking to those of you who aren't my people, but you're still a part of my plan. And they would think, great, I'm still a part of God's plan. It would be a very good idea to find out what that plan is and what your involvement is going to be. It's either going to be as somebody who's heard the alert, who's heard the warning, who's humbled their heart and turned to him, or somebody who he just described how thoroughly he's going to destroy you. Do you remember the second Nineveh that we talked about in Nahum? The counterweight to grace? Judgment. Oh, everybody's in God's plan somewhere. See, in every fishing pond, there's a victor and there's a loser. Sometimes it's the fisherman's the victor. Sometimes it's the fisherman that's the loser. But the loser, the fisherman, can't be the same as the fish. All right, I'm gonna try to do this here. All right. Fish. Fisherman. Okay. Hook. Not to scale. I think the fish is closer to us than the fisherman is, so it just seems bigger. Now, if the fish gets that hook, he's the loser, he's the victor. He gets to bring home a fish. If the fish does not get that hook, the fish is the victor, the fisherman is the loser, because he didn't want one out for it. Ethiopia, Nineveh, Ammon and Moab, the Philistines, are they losers or victors? Now, what we read there, the nations are losers, undoubtedly. But does that mean that every Ammonite, because they were born an Ammonite, is going to be judged? Does that mean that every Ethiopian, because they were born an Ethiopian, is going to be judged? Does it mean that every one of us? Maybe. What did we say about the tribes of Israel? Not everybody from the tribe of Benjamin is going to heaven, right? What makes the difference? Do they turn to Christ? Do they hear the warning? Do they turn to God? Are they the victor or are they the loser? It depends on whether they, oh, that's a hook, looks like a J. Do you catch Jesus? Do you allow Jesus to catch you? Do you believe the warnings that God's giving us here and say, we've sinned. Destruction's coming. It's imminent. I have until the first raindrops fall to get my heart right with God and to turn to him. Because we know God's going to protect his, just like the illustration of Noah's Ark. Before he brought the rains, he made the provision. And he made that place of provision so that his people could be protected when judgment came. I believe in the world that we live in now, it's the same weather forecast. But we have, whether you're in the emergency alert system area or you're out here in the fringe. See, we always assume that every Ethiopian is going to get judged, and they deserve to be judged. God said so. I'm not going to argue with God. Deuteronomy 23:4 says why they're going to be judged. But just because you were born in that bloodline doesn't mean that you can't accept Jesus and escape that judgment. And that's really the lesson for us today. We hear the weather forecast imploring. I mean, the clouds are already formed. It's coming. But in God's mercy, he gives one last warning. Turn to me. Forsake your wicked ways. Come with a humble heart, not a proud, despised heart. And he'll save you. So the weather report's there. The question becomes, the emergency alert system has been activated. The question becomes, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to turn to him? Are you going to heed the warning? Beg for his mercy, his protection. That's the lesson of the national report. And remember, April showers. Next week, we're going to talk about the Mayflowers. The purpose of all of this rain. Because we complain about the severe thunderstorms. We complain about the tornadoes. And rightfully so.
Sun's coming out.
But those of us that know people who plant things, you really need them. You need them for growth. You need them to prep the soil. And I don't want to give away next week's lesson. But that's the lesson for today. Any questions on anything today? All right. Wow, it took longer than I thought it would. Anyway, let's have a word of prayer. Remember those that got saved today especially. Remember those who the Lord's tugging at their heart to make a decision for him, that haven't done it, that the Lord would not let up on them, and that they would continue to have an open heart to what the Lord wants to do in their lives. We'll have a word of prayer. We'll be dismissed. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for your mercy. Thank you for the weather map that you give us, the forecast. You tell us the judgment that's coming. You tell us of the severity, how total the destruction is going to be. And Lord, you don't do that without purpose. You want us to turn our hearts to you, and we just pray that you would help your word to be able to do that in our hearts and in our lives. We thank you for this day that you've given to us. We thank you for those precious souls. We pray for those that have to make decisions. We pray for just all the requests that were made known this morning, Lord, that you would meet each and every one in a way that only you can, that you'd bring comfort to those that need it, encouragement to those that need it, and Lord, that you would use us to be able to do that in their lives. We just thank you for it. We just pray that you'd keep us until we can meet here again, and we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, folks.